Now it is King Charles, and how long he has waited to hear those words. Someday soon, as the crown is placed upon his head, he will become one of the anointed few. What kind of king, then, will he be? He's been called sensitive and selfish, intelligent and passionate, dithering and difficult. There are many different views of the man and his mission. So how will he manage his task? This is the story of the man we think we know, and his moment, and what it will mean for him and for us, now that he is at last King Charles III. To state the obvious, this is a time of profound change. We have lost a much-loved queen and gained a brand new king at a time of considerable political tumult both at home and abroad. For most of us, the Queen was all we had ever known as head of state. Up there on that balcony, on the stamps, the steady, unflinching, unchanging backdrop to our lives. Always there, always the same. But in a very real sense, the monarchy is the monarch. So as the winds of change blow through the palace corridors, what will be different now? Beyond her love of corgis and horses, the Queen's views on pretty much every subject were opaque. She appeared to be the original blank canvas onto which we could project our ideas. This king is different. We know of his passionate interventions and long letters to ministers. He says all that is behind him now, that he understands the nature of his new role. But will he, indeed should he, change?
I was once doing a program about the Prince of Wales, and he looked at me straight in the eye and he said, "Do you know what people don't understand is that I really love this country. I have a passion for this country, and I will continue to speak out on things that concern me about this country." And I think that, almost more than anything else, encapsulates what he is and encapsulates the monarch he will be.
Your deliberations over the next 2 weeks will decide the fate not only of those alive today, but also of generations yet unborn.
He's thought very deeply about the role and its nature. So I think he understands completely the role, our institutions, our history. But crucially, I think, like his mother, it goes beyond duty and service. It's also about an understanding of the British people. And that's very important to getting the role and the monarchy and its evolution right.
Of course, this is not 1952. He can't, wouldn't, and possibly shouldn't try to emulate his mother.
When the late Queen came to the throne in 1952, we had a fairly mystical monarchy, and around a third of the people in a survey taken about that time thought she'd been chosen by God. Of course, religious belief was much stronger in the 1950s than it is now. People don't think in that way now. They ask about every institution, not has it existed for a long time, but what use does it do? And I think the new king has understood that point.
Some changes he is said to have had in mind for a long time, and they may come through swiftly.
Charles will scale down the monarchy quite dramatically. A lot of the minor royals, I think, will fade away. It'll be quite a tight-knit group. He will scale down the number of houses they have. I think we will get a leaner, meaner monarchy.
At the start of this story, it is perhaps fair to say one thing. It's always been hard to find anyone to say anything negative about the Queen. But King Charles divides opinion rather more, for good and for ill.
He is an honourable man who has done his level best in every walk of life. He's one of the best prepared, best informed kings that has come to our throne for a very long time, if not ever.
My wife always used to say that if she was going to one of those state events, please let me sit next to Prince Charles. He's the most charming, most talkative, most intelligent person that she'd ever sat next to.
I don't think there's any doubt he's extremely egotistical, but he's had an awful lot of flattery telling him that he is the most important human being in the universe, practically.
So, he is concerned and caring, but is said to be rather self-centered. Not perfect then, but who amongst us is? It is a harsh light we shine on those who wear the crown. If this is the man, or something like it, how did he get here?
Here is the first picture of His Royal Highness Prince Charles of Edinburgh, second in the line of succession, just 4 weeks old.
Born on the 14th of November 1948, Prince Charles grew up in a world utterly unlike anything most of us have ever experienced. It was a childhood shaped around one fact: he was born to be king.
The royals, they live in this very strange, isolated world. I dubbed it Planet Windsor, and it operates on a slightly different set of rules to planet Earth, and it breathes a slightly different form of air, and it looks like ours and it sounds like ours, but it is very lonely there.
Leaving her home on what must surely be the greatest day of her life, Queen Elizabeth drives to her coronation.
His mother had the crown placed upon her head in 1953. Her young son, at just 4 years old, looked on along with the rest of the world. She was just 27 and keen to make her mark on the world stage.
When he was very young, his mother became queen. And the bond, therefore, between him and his mother, I think was never quite as strong as it might have been, because she had a lot of duties to perform, but she was, at the same time, a young mother. The children lived on the top floor of Buckingham Palace, where there was a nursery wing. The Queen would sometimes go up and visit him, but more often than not, she held back. She wasn't that all-encompassing comfort that a child normally expects from a mother.
The young prince would form a close bond with the Queen Mother. His parents were often away touring the world. Their tour of the Commonwealth in 1954 lasted 6 months.
Finally, the royal yacht docked back in Britain, and dignitaries all lined up to meet the Queen, and the young Prince Charles was there. You know, finally he's going to get to see his mother again, and he was so eager that he lined up with the dignitaries, and the very first words she apparently uttered to him on seeing him after all these months was, "Not you, dear."
Life in the palace was protected and isolated. Charles was by many accounts a sensitive young boy, his personality in stark contrast to that of his sister.
Charles is a very different character from his sister, Princess Anne. When sort of contemplating a pony, you know, she would leap on it and ride off. He would be perfectly well aware of its various possibilities, that what it might do to you in the way of bucking you off or kicking you or biting you and all those things. He wasn't a sort of gung-ho character.
You might say Prince Philip was a father of his generation. In a word, tough.
If you equate Charles to being like a plant, some plants need to be sort of stressed in their pots, which was the sort of Prince Philip attitude, and then they sort of flower beautifully, and others need a little bit of watering each day and a little nurturing, and I think that's what his character was much more like.
Over the years, some royal observers have said it was a difficult relationship.
I think Charles had a miserable upbringing. His father said when Charles appeared, it takes a man to have a son, and then he decided that Charles must be made into a man's man.
I think what he wanted in his eldest son was somebody in his own image, and what he got was this very sensitive boy. He never made Charles feel good about himself. He cut the ground from under him time and time again, and But Charles has this absolute adoration of his father, and throughout his childhood and his adulthood, even into his 60s, he was still trying to please his father and to get his father's approval and admiration, and it was something that was very hard to get.
Philip's robust approach to Charles would extend to his education and a school that would be pivotal in defining the new king's character. Just off the Moray coastline in Scotland lies Gordonston, an outward-bound school which over the years has been temporary home to other lords and royals from around Europe, including Prince Philip. Charles was 13 when he arrived. If it doesn't necessarily look like much fun, for him at least, it wasn't.
The day started always with a little bit of a shock in that no matter what the weather, we would have to get up, put on a pair of shorts, no shirt, and we would go for what they called a morning run. Didn't matter whether it was snowing, raining, or anything else, you would run, and then you would come back, and you had to have a cold shower, which lasted a microsecond. But we did that every day.
John Stonborough and Somerset Waters were Gordonston contemporaries of Charles in the 1960s. They now spend much of their time here in the US. Their time at Gordonston with Charles might belong to a different age, but it left a lasting impression.
One of the mistakes that was made when Charles arrived at Gordonston was that we were all told, everybody said, he's just to be treated like everybody else. But he wasn't everybody else, was he? He was going to be King of England. And he had a private detective. We didn't have private detectives. And when he came, they strengthened all the rules, and it became a stricter school. And I think that some people took it out on him. I actually witnessed one straight sort of attack on Prince Charles during a rugby game when he was in the scrum, and one guy pulled his ear, and another guy punched him right in the scrum. And there was a little bit of pride, you know, that somehow that these people had managed to clock the future King of England.
Charles learnt about adversity, how to handle it, and also how to escape from it.
Outside of class, I certainly remember encountering him in the school library. He conveyed to me that he loved to fish. And he loved to get away by himself, perhaps with his chaperone. And that was indicative to me of his sort of quiet, patient personality. He loved to be by himself, to be able to sit quietly on a stream.
Despite some unhappy aspects back then, Gordonston is ultimately said to have given Charles some inner belief.
He found it difficult to make friends, partly because people found it difficult to make friends with him because they got teased if they tried to be his friend. And in fact, they would make sort of slurping noises, sort of sucking up and being, quotes, the king's friend. But you know, he was the most remarkably stoic person. He never complained, he never whinged about it, or certainly not that we were ever aware of. He just put up with it, he got on with it. And I think that Gordonston probably put a little bit of steel in his backbone.
It's a paradoxical element in his school days. First of all, bang, he was flattened. Secondly, he survived, and therefore he became stubborn, truculent, petulant even, in insisting that he was right. And I think he came to the conclusion, really, that having survived this, that he could put his trust in princeliness. He could expect that if he stuck to his guns, he would win out in the end.
If Charles had survived some tough times in his early school days, he was hardly alone. And like many of his contemporaries, he soon found that the world beyond was considerably more enticing. It was 1966. England won the World Cup, there was a general election, and the 60s were really starting to swing. Whatever the potential appeal of all that, Charles was 10,000 miles away, in the quiet of the Australian outback. He would spend 2 terms at Timbertop, the wilderness branch of Geelong Grammar School in Melbourne.
It was a chance for him to step away from the structure and the bureaucracy, if you like, which was a necessary aspect of the UK system, to somewhere where he could exercise some independence away from the public gaze. One has to realise that he was 16 and a half at that stage, and it was a brave new world for him.
Stuart McGregor was a fellow student tasked with settling in the future king and helping him to feel at ease in the spotlight.
As a supervisor, as a tutor, it really gave him his first, I think, real taste of leadership. And he responded very effectively to that.
Timbertop was a world apart, and in these beautiful surroundings, Prince Charles did seem to flourish.
He was one of the most receptive pupils I've ever had. He was already an historian at heart. He was writing historical essays about the 16th and 17th century monarchs in particular, William the Silent, Louis XIV, and so on, whom I think he understood in a unique way in my experience, because he was seeing them from within. He knew something of the lot of a ruler.
Michael Collins Peirce was Charles's history tutor and mentor in 1966. He encouraged the young prince to learn lessons from past kings and queens, and was key, many think, to instilling more confidence in Charles.
Prince Charles was a different kind of being, sensitive and with a wonderful balance, I think, of masculine and feminine qualities in his character. Timbertop played an important part in the evolution of somebody who could not only satisfy his father, but also deal with all kinds of people, which is an ideal, of course, for a monarch in waiting. Sensitive, intelligent. The difference we made probably was to give him more confidence at a crucial time, so that when I saw him again, I sensed that the confidence was there.
In Australia, Charles was on public display without his parents by his side for the first time. It was a raw and unedited lesson in what the royal family meant to people living in countries across the world. Now that Charles is king, there will no doubt be fresh debate over the monarchy's role in the Commonwealth and in countries like Australia, where he is, for now at least, head of state.
Coming advance, you're in time. March!
Here in Victoria, they're reenacting the critical years of British colonial rule. In a referendum in 1999, Australians voted to keep the monarchy, but it was close. Almost 55% in favour. All these years later, opinions remain fairly mixed.
I think Australians need to get smart, and I think they need to give up debate on becoming a republic, because at the end of the day, our very political essence, our constitution, is all based on the British Westminster system, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
I think in the next 12 months you'll see things start to progressively push towards working away from the monarchy and taking them off as our head of state and having our own head of state.
I think Her Majesty has done a superb job, and Charles has got enormous shoes to fill. I mean, he's been groomed for it all his life, so good luck to him.
The issue is not just whether you like or dislike the institution or even Charles himself, monarchists argue, but what you might choose instead.
Now this moment, the accession of King Charles is being seen by the Republicans as yet another silver bullet. They're always searching for the silver bullet, which will suddenly put in their laps a republic without them doing any work, without them devising a new wonderful Republican constitution. This will just drop a republic into their laps, and it won't. Charles will bring his usual style, which is affable, charming, and calming. I think the Commonwealth countries will see him as a leader, that he's always been a man of great service and principle.
As he emerged out of Australia and into adulthood, Prince Charles was something of a celebrity, an eligible bachelor, an action man even.
Charles was he was a great outdoors man. He's very hardy and he's tough physically and very resilient. And people adore him, you know, they do, because he's a remarkably easy human being.
But beneath the bold, confident exterior, the media image of its time, the prince remained perhaps a more anxious individual than the wider public was led to believe.
He wrote quite a lot of letters at that period of time, and he talked to a lot of people, and most of what was going on the inside was not fearlessness, but great fears about who he was, about how to interact with women. And so that period of time where he was seen as this action man was actually one of the times there was the greatest dissonance between his public persona and his interior world.
The shadows of the past haunted him too. The abdication crisis of 1936 still hung over the monarchy. Charles's great-uncle, Edward VIII, had relinquished the crown in order to marry the love of his life, a divorcee that politicians and the public couldn't and wouldn't accept. Some viewed it as a cautionary tale, a warning to future generations. Charles then was under considerable and consistent pressure from within the family and without to find a suitable match. It was to lead him into a terrible miscalculation.
And forsaking all other, keep thee only unto her, so long as ye both shall live.
I will.
Many have argued this was a marriage that should simply never have happened.
I believe that on his way down the aisle, Charles did glance across at Camilla with a slightly wistful look on his face. I think that Charles probably knew he was making a mistake. But it was too late. He didn't have the courage, and goodness knows who would have had the courage, to call off a wedding of that magnitude. And Diana likewise. I mean, she said shortly before the wedding, she'd said to her sisters, "I can't go through with this." And they'd said, "Too late, Dutch. Your face is on the tea towels."
A new princess for Wales at the first moment of meeting her people. And the shyness seemed gone, replaced by a genuine wonderment that so many people, from packed pavements to the roofs and windows of tall office blocks around, should want to share her joy.
The marriage between Charles and Diana was a train smash. I mean, there was, for one thing, the total incompatibility between the two of them. These are two people who should never have married one another.
It was a tragedy. No party to this marriage set out for this to happen. I mean, why would they? Why would you want to inflict on each other such sadness?
He, for his part, was very insecure, unconfident, and what he needed in a wife was someone who would support him, who would encourage him, who would take an interest in him, and provide all of the things that he frankly didn't get from his parents, or felt he didn't get from his parents.
As it became clear that the marriage wasn't working on a personal level, on a professional level, it became a war.
Certainly looking at it from Diana's side of the fence, where I was, there was a very intimidating array of establishment firepower directed at her. Quite obviously, most visibly, in the size, extent of the prince's household, You know, I can remember program meetings where there were maybe 20 people on his side of the table and only 2 on our side. It was that obvious.
And you might say, as in all wars, it became a pretty ugly business.
There was a kind of sense of entitlement, arrogance almost, I felt, about the way in which the Prince's team went about their business. I sort of saw them as the Roman legionaries, floundering around in British boggy landscape with their big shields and armor, and Diana like Boadicea, the warrior queen, appearing out of the mist, taking a good whack at them and then disappearing into the undergrowth.
On the airwaves, in response to searching personal questions from Jonathan Dimbleby, came a now famous revelation from Charles.
Did you try to be faithful and honourable to your wife when you took on the vow of marriage?
Yes, absolutely.
And you were?
Yes. Until it became irretrievably broken down.
In an explosive interview, the circumstances around which are now seen in a different light, his wife went on to give her side of the breakdown of their marriage.
Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded.
As it all spilled into the public domain, the press, the people even, were quick to judge.
There's always some people who are judgmental. But I think that one of the key truths of Christianity is that when we look within ourselves, we see in ourselves our own sin and failure. And we are not called to throw stones at other people, but to be honest about our own failures. He has been, rather than judging him, it's a lesson for us to learn.
It is announced from Buckingham Palace that with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate.
It was a tremendous explosion of emotion. I mean, you know, how could this happen? This was, after all, supposed to be the fairy tale. And fairy tales are not supposed to end in this way.
For our new king, one of the many legacies has been the abiding perception that he was mainly to blame and that he had failed.
I think the separation and the divorce damaged the Prince of Wales, and I think that damage continues. After all, he was the older, more experienced, allegedly the wiser of the 2 people in that marriage.
I feel that Charles has been badly done by, actually. He knows he failed, and he carries that sense of failure with him to this day. But he did his best. But the public, by and large, I think, condemn him for having failed.
If what had gone before was sad enough, the end was a tragedy few who were alive at the time will ever forget, least of all Diana's former husband.
He immediately went over to Paris to pick up the Princess of Wales's body and escort it back to London, and he was completely devastated. I mean, Charles is a very sensitive person, and naturally, for months after that, he was extremely depressed.
A bereft nation, a devastated family, and a dark, sad, confusing moment in our history.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Charles would once more have to rebuild himself and plot a course back towards normality, not to mention public rehabilitation. The recovery from Diana's death and how King Charles achieved it owed a great deal to the woman who had always been there, for good or ill, and one might say, for better, for worse.
Camilla stuck with the prince, and I think she is responsible, single-handedly, for the transformation that came over the Prince of Wales. When Diana died, he was in the most terrible place, emotionally, mentally, and she has picked him up. She has turned him round and will make him a better king than he would otherwise have been.
Camilla has been the best thing to happen. Most important thing is he doesn't get agitated, he doesn't get stressed, he doesn't get, sometimes you'd see that bit of anger come into him. I don't see that anymore.
All those who know her agree Camilla has a pretty well-developed sense of humour. Her friends say she is unpretentious and down to earth.
Camilla is my mother's elder sister. She's a very straightforward person. What you see is what you get. She clearly loves her husband, and you can clearly see in the autumn of their life, a really happy, loving couple. He married my aunt. It was, to be honest, quite a strange day. I think that Camilla clearly was quite nervous, and our job as the kind of family, extended family, is just to try and be positive and help. But I would have thought it was quite an intimidating moment for them.
But not everyone finds it so easy to forgive and forget.
Anybody who was young and idealistic at the time of the marriage in 1981 can only have felt terrible disappointment that so many years later, Charles and Camilla are getting married in a very different sort of ceremony, and we are expected to be happy with that.
Perhaps it depends then on how much we want the sins of the past to determine our vision of the future.
Camilla went through years of hell to get to where she is today. The public has, generally speaking, been very against her. Some still hate her to this day and will not accept that she was not responsible for the breakdown of Charles's marriage to Diana.
She has spoken candidly about the vilification that she went through. She felt stigmatized, she felt attacked from all quarters. And I think she has said to me, she wouldn't wish such a difficult time on anyone. We used to get the most foul letters, which were of such a nature that we had to inform the police.
There is the belief in fresh starts and the ability to begin again. How can we deny to him what is taken for granted in our society?
Fresh start or not, there is little doubt Charles has paid a heavy price for the breakdown of his marriage. And it is hard to avoid the conclusion that a part of that is in his relationships with his sons. It is difficult for outsiders to get a real handle on the truth. It was always complicated, though few then could have predicted the discord of recent years.
Charles has always had quite a difficult relationship with his sons. He was a good father in as much as he helped them over the death of their mother.
Oh, yes, very nice. Very nice.
But inevitably, his marriage to Camilla has been difficult for them because they knew what their mother thought of Camilla. I think he wasn't as hands-on as he might have been. He's always been driven by his sense of duty and his need to work.
But as Archbishop Welby says, the chance of a fresh start is a critical aspect of Christianity, even, you might say, of humanity. So this is perhaps a good moment to consider the fact that the new king is now the head of the Church of England, which still retains a central role in the life of the state. His mother's Christian faith was profound and deeply felt. So what about her son?
Every indication is that for him, his personal faith is something of immense importance. He is someone who has a deep appreciation of the mystical, of the inner life. In a way that's very challenging, his commitment to retreats, for prayer, which he does from time to time, just to reflect, to be with God, to be quiet.
One of the things that he does in his leisure is to sit and pore over religious texts in these little follies that he dots about his properties. He likes to be on his own. He likes to be secluded like a monk, reading religious texts.
As king, Charles will be defender of the faith when he's crowned. But he has made clear over the years that he sees the role as stretching beyond the realms of one religion. Jonathan Dimbleby's 1994 interview shone a light on the depth of the prince's strength of feeling.
I personally, you see, would much rather see it as defender of faith, not the faith, because it means just one particular interpretation of the faith, which I think is sometimes something that causes a great deal of problem. It has done for hundreds of years. People have fought each other to the death over these things.
To many British Muslim scholars, Charles has been one of the most imaginative and far-sighted figures in the Western world. One, indeed, who has stuck his neck out to defend Islam against ignorance and discrimination. A speech in 1993 entitled Islam and the West was, say many, years before its time, and it would reverberate across the Islamic world.
The links between these two worlds matter more today than ever before, because the degree of misunderstanding between the Islamic and Western worlds remains dangerously high.
Before he delivered the lecture, I must say I had no idea of what tremendous impact it was going to have.
Farhan Nizami is director of the Oxford Centre for Islamic Studies, of which Charles has been a patron for decades. He was there for that iconic speech.
The very fact that a person in his position was prepared to stand up, to say those things, and to express it in such a genuine fashion, I think that is what made the difference. We had Nelson Mandela come and speak at the center. We have had senior world figures. But in terms of its shelf life, I think the Prince of Wales's lecture is in a league of its own.
Our judgment of Islam has been grossly distorted by taking the extremes to be the norm. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a serious mistake.
It went on to alert us to the prejudices and stereotypes that are taking over now, and that we cannot allow our mutual ignorances and differences to lose sight of the commonality between these two worlds.
Prescient, forward-thinking, ahead of his time, our new king has been praised in some quarters and mocked in others. Throughout his life, though, he has been keen to let the world know his views. Take this on the proposed extension of the National Gallery in 1984.
But what is proposed seems to me like a monstrous carbuncle on the face of a much loved and elegant friend.
Charles has firm beliefs about where our society should be heading, how we should live, and how we should interact with our environment. He even wrote books and presented a documentary on the way society should look.
When did we lose our sense of vision? How could those in control become so out of step with so many Londoners who felt powerless to resist the destruction of their city?
To see Charles's philosophies in action, you could go to Poundbury in Dorset. It's a town quite unlike any other.
Poundbury is known to the locals as Charleville, and it's been described as the Parthenon meets Brookside. It's a strange hybrid of a village. It's a model village. It's a sort of pastiche of 18th century buildings. And actually, it's not too bad as far as the locals are concerned.
Sum up Poundbury, well, that's not easy, really. People either love it or hate it. It's one of those places where I first saw it, I didn't like it.
everybody wants to live here. Like, it's like a little attraction, and like it's really nice. It's such a nice development. Like, it's one of a kind.
This looks a little bit like Las Vegas, doesn't it, or Disneyland?
Leon Krier is the Luxembourg architect who made Charles's vision of society a reality. He started designing this experimental town in 1988.
Prince Charles was involved from day one, and very energetically, because I was alone against a very large team of people who didn't want to do it. So he had to bang the table many times to stay on course.
Despite some objections, Poundbury has flourished. It's more than tripled its population size over the last 15 years.
One of the things that Charles obviously hated was the idea of soulless dormitory housing camps, basically. And the idea behind Poundbury was that you would seek to involve the community in ways of creating places of work as well as places to live, different kinds of housing, different ways of thinking about the community, different opportunities to rethink all of that connectedness between people in the same physical space.
Some supporters even think Poundbury is one of King Charles's greatest triumphs. So what did his parents make of it when they came to visit?
I watched closely to see whether his parents might privately or publicly show some endorsement. I would have expected her to say something about how proud she was of her son having built this whole place. But she didn't. She just declared it open.
If some of his pet projects haven't been to everyone's taste, there are many more. You'll have heard of Highgrove, of course, the new king's Gloucestershire estate, where he indulges his passion for gardening. And Home Farm next door, where he ran his organic food business. But perhaps less well known, and one that seems to encapsulate almost everything the new king believes in, is Dumfries House. This 18th century Palladian home in Scotland, with its priceless Chippendale furniture, was set to be sold in 2007, a national gem gone forever, some might say, until Charles stepped in.
I couldn't bear to see yet another house being denuded of its contents, and they would have gone for an enormous amount of money, I suspect, at auction, and then be left with a shell owned by somebody where it would have just become derelict, and another of these desperate, tragic houses that would never have been able to be brought back to life again.
Dumfries House has generated millions of pounds for the local economy and resurrected traditional skills and crafts such as stonemasonry, which had been in decline.
Nothing will ever be forgotten of what he's brought to this area. Prior to 2007, there was nothing like this. To create this wonderful facility here for the people of the local area has been phenomenal. In total, there's around 200 employees on the estate here, and all over 1,000 suppliers who now work with us.
Some say that when you walk around the gardens here at Dumfries House, you see clearly what is inside his head. In particular, his desire to protect the natural world.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are in the midst of a crisis that is now, I hope, well understood. Global warming, climate change, and the devastating loss of biodiversity are the greatest threats humanity has ever faced.
When he started talking about things like climate change, people would say, you're scaremongering. Started talking about organic farming, they'd say, niche, not relevant. Started talking about the ways in which we needed to protect critical biomes, whether they're marine or land biomes, people would say, oh, what are you on about now? And he developed some pretty thick skin at that time.
For his friends and supporters, the new king has always been a deep thinker who has managed, over and over again, to be ahead of his time. If you really you want an example of what a difference King Charles can make, friends argue, take a look at what happened after the riots in 2011.
Flames leap into the night from a double-decker bus burning on Tottenham High Road. More than 300 rioters threw petrol bombs, stones and fireworks at police. Several shops and homes were also set on fire.
The riots is deeply etched into my soul. It was an awful, apocalyptic moment. I'll never forget walking up Tottenham High Road after the first evening of madness with broken glass under my feet. It was like a vision of hell. It was a devastating, devastating moment because for so many of those people who'd lost everything, there was a profound sense that their neighbours had done this to them.
It felt as if that part of London had quite simply been brought to its knees.
Prince Charles gripped the riots as if they were in his backyard. He came quickly, he brought Camilla, and he just kept coming back.
Hi Camilla, how are you? You all right? Welcome to Tottenham. Welcome to Tottenham.
He got involved in meetings, corralled people, brought them together. And the thing was, he didn't just come on his own, he brought his charities with him. The Prince's Trust to support young people who had got caught up in the riots. He bought all the businesses that have supported him over so many years, and that was critical for us. And I've got to say, actually, he put more effort in than, even prime ministers and leaders of the opposition. They didn't come back.
Perhaps we shouldn't be surprised by our new king's response to the riots. His Prince's Trust grew out of similar circumstances in the early 80s. Back then, unemployment was above 3 million, and there were riots raging in cities across the country.
Somewhere along the way, Prince Charles felt that there were many, many people in this country who were displaced, who were out of place, who couldn't find a role in society. He managed to get a variety of people to help him to assist these young people in literally finding a purpose in their lives.
Today, the Prince's Trust has helped more than 1 million young people in Britain. But for all those who praise his involvement with public life, there are others who are not so sure. From his letter writing, those so-called black spider memos, to his speeches, some see him as no more than a troublesome meddler.
His track record suggests that he will bear down much more toughly than his mother has done on the Prime Minister of the day. If he does this, it's a risky strategy because the point of the monarchy is that it should be above politics. Once he gets involved in politics, he is endangering, he's threatening the stability of the throne.
In reality, the new king's role is clear. Almost every speech he makes is on the advice of ministers. He can't say anything they don't approve of. But he does have the right to be consulted, and he will meet the Prime Minister once a week when he can make his views known. Some have frankly dismissed the notion that he will meddle.
I think it's absolutely absurd. When I was a defence minister, he wrote me a letter to tell me about the living conditions and one or two other problems for these troops in the barracks in Hong Kong. And I didn't know about them. What he told me was very, very important, and it led to them being dealt with. Now, I don't regard that as meddling. I regard that as extremely helpful.
The King is the sovereign, but Parliament is sovereign, and he understands that. And I remember him saying to me, I understand the difference between being the heir to the throne, where you're perfectly entitled to get involved in issues and push for issues, and being the monarch in that important constitutional role.
Not long ago, Charles made clear he understood the transition to the new role. Would he carry on interfering, if you want to call it that? He was asked. No, he said, complete nonsense. I am not, he added, that stupid. The role of sovereign was a separate exercise entirely. The monarchy in Britain has existed in various forms for over 1,000 years, through rebellions and revolutions, or the like, reformations and restorations. King Charles will inevitably make his own mark. So are we about to live through a period of continuity or one of change?
Will Charles be simply a kind of footnote, small reign at the end of this epic Elizabethan age? Or even with a relatively short reign, will he be able to use it to transition and redefine the monarchy into something fit for the 21st century? And in that sense, make it an easier task for his son, William, when he eventually inherits the throne.
He has already been tested. The family has expanded and evolved, with his sons embarking, as Harry put it, on very different paths.
The decision that I have made for my wife and I to step back is not one I made lightly.
There have been explosive revelations, not least this interview with Oprah Winfrey, which shed light on a painful divide between father and son.
Is he taking your calls now?
Yeah, he is. There's a lot to work through there. You know, I feel really let down because he's been through something similar. He knows what pain feels like.
The Oprah Winfrey interview certainly was a moment where the tensions between Harry and his father and brother were really ratcheted up.
And the couple even levelled accusations of racism at an unnamed member of the royal family.
The battle lines have been drawn. If I had to sort of predict where the first tension point will be, would it be between monarch and people, palace and people, palace and press? Actually, it could end up being, you know, former Prince Harry and his father. And that really is quite a remarkable thought.
In recent weeks, there have been signs of reconciliation and olive branches, in public at least.
I want also to express my love for Harry and Meghan as they continue to build their lives overseas.
But there seems little chance as yet of the wounds between Harry and his father and brother being healed anytime soon. And in this conflict lies one of the monarchy's perennial issues. How does the heir manage the spare in a hierarchical, rules-based system where money and power is determined by birth, and where marriage can create a new and different dynamic? Could Charles fashion a different model, if not for his sons, perhaps for the next generation? King Charles's brother Andrew poses a very different test, enveloped in a scandal of his own making that, despite his role in the Queen's funeral, has seemingly condemned him to the periphery of the monarchy. There is one other thing that does worry some observers: Charles's management style. The Queen's Court was a very straightforward place. Some find his a bit, well, medieval in style.
He's never known what it is to be managed, and he doesn't really know how to manage. And so he thinks that the way to get the best out of his aides and the people who work in his charities is to get them competing. And I met people who would tell me some fairly hair-raising stories about that. And one of these people compared it to Wolf Hall.
More recently, his judgment has been brought into sharp focus. Questions, for example, over donations to his charities.
One of the curious contradictions at the heart of monarchy, they don't have endless amounts of cash to spend on the causes or pet projects close to their heart. People flying in from around the world were desperate to get up close to Britain's future king, and that inevitably carried with it a significant degree of risk.
There have been some very uncomfortable newspaper headlines about, cash in suitcases, poor choice of advisors, which, have made uncomfortable reading. Is there something to be fearful of with perhaps the access and the deals that have been done and his judgment?
The question is it ideal for the words cash in bags to appear in the same sentence as Prince, now King Charles? Clearly the answer is no. Clarence House has always been adamant that these were decisions ultimately which lay in the hands of his charities. Charles nevertheless has always stated that his activities, especially in terms of fundraising, are likely to stop when he becomes king.
As far as the future of the monarchy is concerned, it is almost certainly what we feel and not what we think that will count. The system might or might not make sense on paper, but it is what we know, what we are used to. So will it prosper under our new king?
The British, I think, are a very profoundly monarchical people because, of course, the alternative to the monarchy is having a politician. And I'm reminded of a comment John Major once made that if the answer is another politician, you're asking the wrong question.
The honeymoon period of the new reign will be filled with people wishing him well, as I think he will be incredibly moved by what happens. And I think you'll see that. He's a person who wears his emotions very openly.
What is not in doubt is that the first few months and years are critical.
The minute he becomes a little bit popular, there will then be some terrible thing to try and cut him down. That's the way it works in this country. And the thing about the monarchy is that it is above all that. So of course I worry about it because I want it all to be a great, great success, and I'm sure it will be. But it's going to be a difficult time, of course. It is an era of transition that has happened very, very rarely. It hasn't happened at all in my lifetime.
I think the future of the monarchy will be very safe under Charles. He cares passionately about this institution. And he has worked his entire life to this point, preparing for this moment.
Charles the man, somebody with a clear sense of entitlement, but also of duty, of destiny, and under no illusions about the weight of the burden that he inherits.
He will ascend to the throne without a mother who came to define the monarchy and without a father who passed away before his 100th birthday, present to witness his son's greatest moment. But by his side will be his biggest support, stepping up into the role of Queen Consort.
I think the Queen announcing that she wanted Camilla to be known as Queen Consort was an incredibly important moment for him because it was the last bit of acceptance that he desired from his parents and from the institution.
So the countdown to his coronation, his moment of destiny, has begun. And on that day itself, when it dawns, the world will be watching.
To crown a king, to crown a monarch, is something that no archbishop's done for a very, very long time indeed. It feels an immense responsibility for the coronation to be something in which the whole country is swept up in celebration.
He's terribly aware of what goes on. He'd want to continue to be aware, and that's the kind of king he's going to be.
King Charles, the man I know, is a humble, kind, opinionated, caring man. He is a great role model for many people and has been a great role model for me personally. And I'm proud he's our king, and I'm proud to know him.
God, I hope I can cover the coronation. I really would love to do that. Even if I have to do it in a wheelchair, I'm going to try and do it. Because, you know, I'll just be so proud when I see him put the crown on his head. I think that'd be a proud moment for him and me.
It is hard to imagine what a life so constrained by destiny is like. So full of privilege, so devoid of choice. But in a way that only a few of the rest of us ever manage, he can make his mark on history now. He walks in the footsteps of the vain and the venal, but of the great and the good too. This is his chance. And like it or not, love him or not, the king he is and the king he will be is something that cannot fail to have an impact on every single one of us.